The autumn rain fell heavily on the windows of Clarence's house as Camilla Parker Bowles sat in her private sitting room, her hands trembling slightly as she held a cup of Earl Grey tea. The year was 2005, just months after her marriage to Prince Charles, and the weight of royal life pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy cloak she couldn't remove. She had always known marrying into the British royal family would be challenging, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of it all. The constant scrutiny from the media, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, and the cold shoulders from certain members of the royal household had taken their toll. That particular October evening, as darkness settled over London, Camilla made a decision that would shock everyone who knew her. She couldn't continue living this way. The pressure had become unbearable, and she needed to escape, even if just for a few days. She needed time to think, to breathe, to remember who she was before all of this. Earlier that day, she had endured another difficult luncheon where several aristocratic ladies had made pointed remarks about Diana, the late Princess of Wales. Their words, though wrapped in polite smiles and proper etiquette, cut deep. One elderly duchess had even mentioned how Diana's sons, William and Harry, must find it so difficult to see their father with someone new. Camilla had smiled through it all, as she had been trained to do, but inside, something had broken. She returned to Clarence's house and went straight to her room, dismissing her lady's maid with unusual abruptness. For hours, she sat alone, contemplating her life and the choices that had led her here. As the clock struck 9 in the evening, Camilla quietly packed a small bag. She chose simple clothes, nothing that would draw attention. Her plan was straightforward. She would slip out through the service entrance, take a taxi to a small hotel she knew in the countryside, and spend a few days away from everything. She wouldn't tell anyone, not even Charles, who was away on official duties in Scotland. She wrote a brief note and left it on her dressing table. "I need some time. Please don't worry. I'll return soon." The words seemed inadequate, but she couldn't find better ones. How could she explain the suffocating feeling that had been building for months? Moving through the corridors of Clarence's house with practiced quiet, Camilla knew the routines of the staff and security. She had observed them carefully over the months, not with any plan to escape, but simply out of habit. Now, that knowledge served her well as she made her way toward the service areas of the residence. The rain outside had intensified, which she saw as fortunate. It would make her less visible, and the sound would mask any noise she might make. She pulled a plain raincoat from a closet near the staff quarters and wrapped a scarf around her head. In the dim light, she looked like any other middle-aged woman heading out into the London night. As she approached the service entrance, her heart pounded in her chest. This was madness, she knew. A member of the royal family couldn't simply walk out and disappear. But desperation drove her forward. She needed this escape. Needed to prove to herself that she still had some control over her own life. The door was just ahead, and beyond it, freedom. At least temporary freedom. She reached for the handle, her fingers closing around the cold metal. One turn, one step, and she would be outside. She took a deep breath, steadying herself for what she was about to do. But as Camilla began to turn the handle, a firm voice behind her made her freeze. "Your Royal Highness, I'm afraid I can't allow you to leave." She spun around to find James Morrison, one of the senior members of the Royal Protection Squad, standing in the shadows. He was a tall man in his 40s, with kind eyes but an unmistakable air of authority. How long had he been watching her? "James," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I needed some air." He stepped forward into the light, and she could see the concern on his face. "With respect, ma'am, you were planning to leave. I've been observing you for the past hour. The packed bag, the note you left, the route you chose. It all points to someone trying to slip away unnoticed." Camilla felt her shoulders sag. Of course. She had been watched. How foolish to think she could simply walk away from her royal duties. Even for a moment. "You don't understand," she began, but her voice cracked with emotion. "Perhaps I understand more than you think," James said gently. He gestured to a nearby room. "Would you join me for a moment, ma'am? There's something I need to share with you." something that might change your perspective on tonight." Confused and defeated, Camilla followed him into what appeared to be a small office used by the security team. James closed the door behind them and motioned for her to sit. She remained standing, clutching her bag, still partly hoping she might convince him to let her go. "Your Royal Highness," James began, choosing his words carefully. "I've been in royal protection for 15 years. I've seen members of the family at their highest and lowest moments. What you're feeling right now, the weight of it all, the desire to run, it's more common than you might think." Camilla looked at him sharply. Was he suggesting that other royals had tried to escape? The thought had never occurred to her. She had always assumed everyone else handled the pressure with the grace and dignity she seemed unable to muster. James continued, "But that's not why I stopped you tonight. There's something else. Something we discovered during a routine security review earlier today. It concerns you directly, and I believe you need to know about it before you make any decisions about leaving." He pulled out a folder from a locked drawer and placed it on the desk between them. Camilla could see it was marked with security classifications. Her mind raced. What could possibly be in there that concerned her? "We intercepted some communications," James said, his voice low and serious. "There's been a threat made against you specifically. We weren't going to inform you until we had more information, but given the circumstances..." Camilla sank into the chair, her escape plan forgotten. A threat? Against her? She had received nasty letters before, cruel messages from people who blamed her for Diana's unhappiness. But this seemed different. "What kind of threat?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James opened the folder and showed her a series of photographs and documents. "These were taken over the past 2 weeks. Someone has been following you, ma'am. Not press. We know how to spot them. This is something else entirely." The photographs showed her at various locations, leaving a charity event, shopping in Chelsea, even walking in the private gardens of Highgrove. Whoever had taken them had gotten remarkably close, too close for comfort. "But there's more," James continued. "The person following you left something at each location." He pulled out evidence bags containing small items. A white rose at the charity event, a prayer card at the shop, a piece of jewelry in the garden. Camilla gasped as she recognized the jewelry. That's my bracelet. I lost it years ago. How did they? We believe whoever is doing this has been collecting items connected to you for a very long time," James explained. "This isn't a recent obsession. Our analysts think this person has been watching you since long before your marriage to His Royal Highness." The room seemed to spin slightly as Camilla absorbed this information. Someone had been stalking her for years? The thought was terrifying. Suddenly, the palace walls that had felt like a prison now seemed like protection. "Do you have any idea who it might be?" she asked. James shook his head. "Not yet, but we're working on it. The concerning part is that the messages accompanying these items have been escalating. The latest one, found just this afternoon, suggested that they plan to make direct contact soon." He showed her a note written in neat, precise handwriting. "She doesn't deserve the crown. She doesn't deserve him. But she deserves to know the truth about what really happened. Soon, Camilla. Very soon." The words sent a chill down Camilla's spine. What truth? What really happened? Her mind raced through possibilities, but nothing made sense. "This is why I couldn't let you leave tonight," James said. "Outside these walls, without protection, you would be vulnerable. We need to keep you safe while we investigate this threat." Camilla nodded slowly, understanding dawning. Her personal crisis suddenly seemed less important than this mysterious danger. "What do you need me to do?" "For now, continue with your normal routine," James advised. "We'll increase security discreetly. Don't mention this to anyone except His Royal Highness when he returns. We don't want to alert the stalker that we're aware of their activities." As Camilla prepared to return to her rooms, escorted now by James, she turned to him with a question that had been nagging at her. "You said other royals have felt like running. Who? When?" James smiled slightly. "I'm not at liberty to give names, ma'am. But I can tell you that the person who told me to watch for the signs of someone planning to leave, who taught me what to look for, was someone who once stood exactly where you're standing now. They made it through, found their strength, and went on to become one of the most beloved members of this family. Though he wouldn't say the name, Camilla had a feeling she knew who he meant. The thought that someone else had faced these same doubts and survived gave her a small spark of hope. As they walked back through the corridors, Camilla's packed bag still in her hand, she realized that her attempted escape had led to a discovery that might be more important than her personal struggles. Someone out there had been watching her, waiting for the right moment to reveal some mysterious truth. The rain continued to beat against the windows as she returned to her sitting room. She unpacked her bag slowly, putting each item back in its place. The note she had written, she crumpled and threw in the fireplace. There would be no escape tonight. But perhaps that was for the best. As she prepared for bed, Camilla's mind was full of questions. Who was this person who had been following her? What truth did they claim to know? And most unsettling of all, what did they mean by what really happened? She thought about calling Charles, but decided against it. He would rush back, and she didn't want to worry him unnecessarily. Besides, James had assured her that the security team had everything under control. For now, she would trust in their protection and try to maintain normal appearances. But sleep didn't come easily that night. Every sound in the old building made her jump. Every shadow seemed threatening. The palace that had felt like a prison now felt like a fortress. And she was grateful for its thick walls and vigilant guards. As dawn broke over London, Camilla stood at her window, watching the city wake up. Somewhere, out there, someone was watching her, waiting to deliver their message. The thought should have terrified her. But strangely, it had given her a new sense of purpose. She had been so focused on her own unhappiness that she had forgotten the strength that had carried her through decades of public scrutiny and private pain. She wouldn't run. Not now. Not when there were mysteries to solve and truths to uncover. Whatever this stalker knew, whatever they planned to reveal, she would face it head on. She had survived the hatred of a nation that blamed her for a fairy tale marriage gone wrong. She could survive this too. The escape attempt that had been born of desperation had transformed into something else entirely. Camilla Parker Bowles, the Duchess of Cornwall, had rediscovered her courage in the most unexpected way, and as she dressed for the day ahead, maintaining the facade of normalcy while security worked behind the scenes, she found herself almost eager to discover what secrets lay hidden in her past. The woman who had tried to flee in the night had become a woman with a mission. And that transformation, James Morrison would later reflect, was perhaps the most startling discovery of all. 3 days had passed since Camilla's failed escape attempt, and life at Clarence House had taken on a strange new rhythm. On the surface, everything appeared normal. She attended her scheduled engagements, smiled for photographers, and carried out her royal duties with practiced grace. But beneath the calm exterior, a complex investigation was underway. Prince Charles had returned from Scotland immediately upon being informed of the situation. His reaction had surprised Camilla. Instead of anger at her attempted departure, he had pulled her into a tight embrace and whispered, "I'm so sorry you felt you had to run. We'll face this together. Whatever it is." The security team had established a command center in a discreet section of Clarence House. James Morrison led the operation with quiet efficiency, coordinating with Scotland Yard and intelligence services. What they were uncovering proved to be far more complex than anyone had initially imagined. On the morning of the 4th day, James requested a private meeting with both Charles and Camilla. They gathered in Charles's study, a room lined with books and personal photographs that felt safer somehow than the formal reception rooms. "We've made significant progress," James began, spreading several documents across the mahogany desk. "The person who's been following Her Royal Highness has been identified." Camilla leaned forward, her heart racing. Charles placed a protective hand on her shoulder as James continued. "Her name is Margaret Thornfield. Age 58. She worked as a housekeeper at Bolahide Manor in the early 1970s. James paused, watching Camilla's face carefully. "That was your family home, wasn't it, ma'am?" Camilla gasped. Bolahide Manor. She hadn't thought about the old house in years. Her parents had sold it decades ago. But it held so many memories of her childhood and young adulthood. Margaret. Yes. I remember her vaguely. She was young then, maybe just 18 or 19, very quiet. She left suddenly one day. My mother was quite put out about it. There's a reason she left suddenly, James said, producing another set of documents. We've been through employment records, medical files, and police reports from that time. Margaret Thornfield was hospitalized in late 1973 after what was described as a nervous breakdown. She had developed an obsessive attachment to your family, particularly to you. Charles frowned. But that was over 50 years ago. Why would she surface now? We believe it's connected to your marriage, James explained. Margaret has been in and out of psychiatric facilities over the decades. She was released from her most recent stay just 6 months ago. The timing coincides with increased media coverage of your wedding anniversary. Something about the coverage triggered her. Camilla's mind raced back to those days at Bolahide. She had been in her early 20s, full of life and dreams. Margaret had been a shadow in the background, always watching, always present. Now, with the benefit of hindsight and this new information, certain memories took on a different cast. She used to leave flowers in my room, Camilla said slowly. White roses. I thought it was my mother's instruction, but Mother always preferred pink roses. And there were times I'd find my things moved, rearranged. Small things, a brush placed differently, a book opened to a certain page. Classic signs of obsessive behavior, James confirmed. But here's where it becomes more concerning. During her various hospital stays, Margaret made numerous claims about knowing secrets about the Parker Bowles family. Most were dismissed as delusions, but one recurring theme caught our attention. He pulled out a psychiatric evaluation from 1985. Camilla read the highlighted section, her face paling. Margaret had claimed repeatedly that she had witnessed something significant at Bolahide Manor, something that would change everything if people knew the truth about that family. What could she possibly mean? Charles asked, but Camilla had gone very quiet. Camilla? Charles prompted gently. She looked up, her eyes distant with memory. There was an incident. Summer of 1973. A young man died on our property. A riding accident, they said. He was a friend of my brother's. The inquest ruled it accidental death, but there were whispers. What kind of whispers? James asked carefully. That it wasn't an accident. That there had been an argument. Something about debts and threats. But Father handled everything, and the matter was closed. We were told never to speak of it again. Camilla's voice was barely audible. Margaret was there that day. She served tea to the police when they came. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. James cleared his throat. We've pulled the original inquest records. There are inconsistencies, witness statements that were never followed up, evidence that was dismissed too quickly. If Margaret really does know something about that day, she could destroy everything, Charles finished quietly. The press would have a field day. They'd paint Camilla's entire family as complicit in a cover-up, which explains the escalation, James added. She's not just obsessed with you, ma'am. She believes she's been carrying this burden of truth for 50 years, and your elevation to the royal family has triggered a need to finally reveal it. Camilla stood abruptly and walked to the window. The weight she had felt before was nothing compared to this. It wasn't just her own reputation at stake now, but her family's name, her children's futures, and the monarchy itself. We need to find her, she said firmly, surprising both men with the steel in her voice. Not to silence her, but to understand. What does she really know? What did she really see? James nodded approvingly. We've been tracking her movements. She's been staying in a boarding house in Richmond, paying cash, keeping a low profile. We could bring her in for questioning, but given her mental health history, we need to be careful. Any aggressive action could trigger a public scene, or worse. What if I talked to her? Camilla suggested, turning back to face them. She's been trying to reach me. Maybe if I went to her. Absolutely not, Charles said immediately. It's far too dangerous. Your Royal Highness is right, James agreed. We can't risk direct contact. However, he paused, considering. We could arrange a controlled meeting, somewhere secure, with full surveillance and protection. If Margaret really does have information about that incident in 1973, we need to know what it is before she decides to go public. Over the next 2 days, preparations were made. The meeting would take place at a private medical facility where Margaret could be evaluated and, if necessary, given appropriate care. Camilla insisted on being present, though she would observe from behind one-way glass rather than face-to-face. The appointed day arrived gray and drizzly, matching Camilla's mood as she traveled in an unmarked car to the facility. Charles had wanted to come, but she had convinced him to stay behind. This was her past, her ghost to face. The facility was discreet, looking more like a country hotel than a medical center. Camilla was escorted to an observation room, where James and a psychiatrist, Dr. Helen Marsh, were waiting. She's calm, Dr. Marsh reported. We told her that someone from the palace wanted to hear her story. She seemed almost relieved. Through the glass, Camilla could see Margaret Thornfield for the first time in 50 years. The young woman she vaguely remembered had become thin and gray, with nervous hands that constantly moved, picking at her sleeves, smoothing her hair. But her eyes were sharp and focused. Another officer, Detective Inspector Sarah Collins, entered the interview room and sat across from Margaret. The conversation began gently, with questions about her time at Bolhide Manor. Margaret answered clearly, her voice stronger than her appearance suggested. I loved working for the Parker Bowles family, she said. They were kind to me, mostly. But they had secrets. All families do, I suppose. But theirs was darker. Tell me about the summer of 1973, Detective Collins prompted. Margaret's hands stilled. You know about that. Then, I wondered if anyone would ever ask. Young Timothy Ashford. Such a charming boy. Always laughing. Until that day. In the observation room, Camilla gripped the edge of the table. Timothy Ashford. She hadn't thought of that name in decades. The story everyone told was that he fell from his horse, Margaret continued. But I saw him earlier that morning. He was arguing with someone in the stables, shouting about money owed, about promises broken. He said he'd go to the newspapers if he wasn't paid what he was owed. Who was he arguing with? Detective Collins asked. Margaret looked directly at the mirror, as if she could see through it. It wasn't Miss Camilla's father, if that's what you're thinking. It was her brother, Mark. Mark owed Timothy money, gambling debts from their time at university. Substantial debts. Timothy had come to collect, threatening to tell Mr. Parker Bowles about his son's gambling problem. Camilla's breath caught. Mark. Her beloved older brother who had died in a car accident 10 years ago. He had never mentioned any of this. What happened next? The detective prompted. I was bringing fresh linens to the guest rooms when I heard the commotion from the stables. By the time I got to the window, I saw Mark striking Timothy with a riding crop. Not to kill, I don't think, just to drive him off. But Timothy stumbled backward, hit his head on the edge of the water trough. The sound. Margaret shuddered. I'll never forget that sound. The observation room was silent except for the hum of recording equipment. Camilla felt as if the world had tilted off its axis. Margaret continued. Mark panicked. He ran to the house, came back with his father. They talked for a few moments. Then Mr. Parker Bowles sent Mark inside and began arranging things, moving the body, placing it near the horse. When the police came, everyone said Timothy had been riding alone, that he must have fallen. The horse was notoriously difficult. It made sense. Why didn't you say anything? Detective Collins asked. Margaret's face crumpled. I was 18, terrified, and completely dependent on that job. Mr. Parker Bowles found me crying in the linen closet that evening. He didn't threaten me, not exactly. He just explained that sometimes terrible accidents happen, and that talking about what I thought I saw would only hurt everyone, including poor Timothy's family. He gave me a reference and money to start over somewhere else. I left the next day, but you kept watching the family. I couldn't help it. I felt connected to them by this terrible secret. And Miss Camilla, she never knew. She was always so kind to me, so gracious. I wanted to protect her from the truth about her brother, her father, but when she married the prince, Margaret's voice hardened. She became part of the establishment that protects its own, just like her father protected Mark, the same system that silences truth to preserve reputation. Dr. Marsh leaned over to Camilla. This is consistent with delusional thinking patterns. She's created a narrative where she's both protector and avenger. But Camilla wasn't listening to the doctor. She was remembering that summer, how Mark had suddenly stopped his wild behavior, had become serious and responsible, how her father had been stern but protective in a way she'd never seen before, how Timothy Ashford's parents had moved away shortly after the funeral, well provided for by an anonymous benefactor. The interview continued for another hour, with Margaret providing more details, some clearly confused by time and mental illness, others disturbingly specific. When it concluded, she made one final statement. I'm tired of carrying this. 50 years is too long. Miss Camilla deserves to know what kind of family she comes from, what kind of secrets she's built her life on, and the world deserves to know that the royal family harbors someone whose father covered up a killing. As Margaret was led away for further evaluation, Camilla remained in the observation room, staring at the empty chair where her past had just been laid bare. James entered quietly. Ma'am, we need to discuss how to proceed. The good news is that Margaret is clearly unwell, and her claims would be difficult to prove. The bad news is that if she goes public, the media will investigate, and investigations have a way of uncovering things better left buried. Camilla stood slowly, feeling every one of her years. I need to know if it's true, she said. I need to know if my father and brother, if they really. We can investigate discreetly, James assured her. But you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that Margaret's account, however distorted by illness, might have a foundation in truth. The journey back to Clarence House passed in a blur. Camilla found Charles in his study, working on correspondence. He looked up as she entered, immediately reading the devastation on her face. My darling, what happened? She told him everything, watching his expression shift from concern to shock to protective anger. When she finished, he pulled her into his arms. Whatever the truth is, we'll face it together, he promised. Your father and brother are gone. You are not responsible for their actions, if indeed Margaret's story is true. But the scandal, Camilla whispered. The press will crucify me. They'll say I'm from a family of criminals and cover-up artists. Everything we've worked for, the acceptance we've finally begun to achieve. Charles held her tighter. Then we'll weather that storm as we've weathered all the others. You are my wife, my duchess, and nothing from 50 years ago changes that. That night, as Camilla lay awake, despite Charles's comforting presence beside her, she thought about the strange journey that had begun with her attempt to escape. She had been running from the pressure of royal life, only to run straight into a past that threatened to destroy everything. The woman who had tried to flee in desperation now faced a choice. Investigate further and risk uncovering a truth that could devastate her family's reputation, or try to contain Margaret's claims and live with the uncertainty forever. Neither option seemed bearable. But as dawn approached, Camilla made her decision. The truth, whatever it was, needed to be known. She had lived with enough secrets, enough hidden shame. If her family had been involved in Timothy Ashford's death and its cover-up, then that truth needed to see light, regardless of the consequences. She thought of Margaret Thornfield, carrying this burden for 50 years, driven to madness by the weight of what she knew. Camilla wouldn't let that happen to herself. Whatever came next, she would face it with the courage she had found in the most unexpected of circumstances. The investigation would continue, The truth would emerge, and Camilla would discover that sometimes the most startling revelations come not from what others tell us, but from what we finally admit to ourselves about the shadows in our own past. The investigation into Timothy Ashford's death had been underway for 2 weeks, conducted with the utmost discretion by a small team of trusted investigators. Camilla had insisted on being informed of every development, no matter how painful. What emerged was a complex picture that neither fully vindicated nor completely condemned her family. Old police files, thought to be destroyed, were recovered from a retired officer's personal collection. Witness statements that had been ignored came to light. Financial records showed large sums of money moving from Parker Bowles' family accounts to the Ashford family in the months following Timothy's death. But it was a single photograph that changed everything. James Morrison arrived at Clarence House on a cold November morning, his expression grave. He found Camilla in her morning room, where she had taken to spending hours poring over family albums, searching faces and occasions for clues she might have missed. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "we found something." A photograph taken by a local newspaper photographer on the day of the incident. He was covering a village fete and happened to capture something in the background. He handed her an enlarged black and white image. In the foreground, villagers enjoyed the summer fete, but in the background, barely visible but unmistakable when enhanced, were 3 figures near the Boleyhide stables. Timothy Ashford, Mark Parker Bowles, and a third person Camilla recognized with a shock that made her hands tremble. "That's David Marchmont," she whispered. "He was Father's business partner. But he was supposed to be in London that day." James nodded grimly. "We've been investigating Mr. Marchmont's connection. It seems the gambling debts weren't Mark's, they were Marchmont's. He had been using your brother as a guarantor without Mark's knowledge, forging his signature on loan documents." Timothy Ashford discovered the fraud and came to confront both men. The room seemed to spin as Camilla absorbed this information. So Mark was trying to protect himself from false accusations? It appears so. We've found Timothy's own diary entries from the days before his death. He believed Mark was involved in the fraud and was demanding money from him. Your brother was likely trying to explain the truth when the altercation occurred. But Margaret said she saw Mark strike Timothy, Camilla protested. "Memory is a tricky thing, especially traumatic memory," James explained. "We've had experts analyze her statements. It's entirely possible that in her frightened state, she confused who was holding the riding crop. The angle from the linen room window would have made it difficult to see clearly." Camilla stared at the photograph, her mind racing. "Where is David Marchmont now?" He died 15 years ago in Switzerland, but his son, Peter Marchmont, is very much alive. And ma'am, he's been in contact with Margaret Thornfield." The revelation hit like a physical blow. "He's been feeding her information? Manipulating her memories?" "We believe so. Peter Marchmont has been facing financial ruin. His father left debts and a legacy of failed businesses. We think he discovered his father's involvement in the Ashford incident and has been planning to use it for blackmail. When that didn't work, your family's money is tied up in trusts he can't touch. He found Margaret and began working on her, reinforcing her confused memories, turning her into a weapon against your family." Charles, who had been listening from the doorway, entered the room. "Can we prove this? We have emails between them, financial transfers. He's been paying for her accommodations, encouraging her obsession. He even provided her with the items she's been leaving, including the bracelet, which he apparently bought from an estate sale of your old belongings." Camilla felt a strange mix of relief and anger. Her brother hadn't been a killer. Her father hadn't covered up a murder. But they had still hidden the truth, allowed David Marchmont to escape consequences, and paid blood money to keep the Ashfords quiet. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Peter Marchmont has committed several crimes. Harassment, stalking by proxy, attempted blackmail. We can arrest him. As for Margaret, she needs proper psychiatric care. The question is whether you want this to become public." Camilla looked at Charles, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. They had lived with secrets and half-truths for so long. Perhaps it was time for honesty. "I want to meet with Margaret again," Camilla decided. Not through glass this time. Face to face. She deserves to know the truth about what really happened. And she deserves to hear it from me. The meeting was arranged for 3 days later at the same facility. This time, Camilla entered the room herself, with James stationed nearby for security. Margaret looked up in shock as the Duchess of Cornwall sat across from her. "Hello, Margaret," Camilla said gently. "Do you remember me?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Miss Camilla, you look royal." "I want to tell you the truth about that day," Camilla said. "The whole truth, as we now understand it. You deserve that after carrying this burden for so long." For the next hour, Camilla carefully explained what the investigation had uncovered. She showed Margaret the photograph, the documents, the evidence of Peter Marchmont's manipulation. She watched as understanding, confusion, and finally a kind of relief passed over the older woman's face. "It wasn't Mark," Margaret whispered. "All these years I thought. But it wasn't him." "All. No, it wasn't. But you were right that something terrible happened, and that my family chose to hide it rather than face the scandal. I'm sorry for what that silence cost you." Margaret began to cry, decades of pain and confusion pouring out. "I just wanted someone to know. I wanted the truth to matter." "It does matter," Camilla assured her. "And now we all know it." In the days that followed, Peter Marchmont was arrested and charged. The story inevitably leaked to the press, but in a controlled way that focused on Marchmont's crimes rather than the historical incident. Margaret was transferred to a specialized facility where she could receive proper treatment for her trauma-induced condition. To everyone's surprise, it was Camilla who insisted on paying for Margaret's care. "She was a victim too," she explained to Charles, "of my family's secrets, of David Marchmont's crimes, and of Peter Marchmont's manipulation. We owe her this." The media response was more muted than expected. The story of a disturbed woman being manipulated by a con man garnered sympathy rather than scandal. Some newspapers even praised Camilla for her compassionate response to someone who had stalked her. But the real change was in Camilla herself. The woman who had tried to flee in the night had become someone different. She had faced the darkest secrets of her past and emerged stronger. At a charity event a month later, she spoke publicly for the first time about the incident. "We all have moments in our family histories that we might wish to forget," she said to the assembled crowd. "But I've learned that running from the past only gives it more power over us. The truth, however difficult, is always better than living in shadow." The speech was widely praised, and something shifted in public perception. The woman who had been reviled as a homewrecker was being seen as human. Flawed, certainly, but honest and compassionate. In a private moment afterward, Charles took her hand. "You've changed," he observed. "That night, when James stopped you from leaving, it transformed you." Camilla considered this. "I thought I was running from the pressure of being royal. But I think I was really running from myself. From the questions I'd never asked about my own family, my own past. When you can't run anymore, you have to turn and face what's chasing you." 6 months later, Camilla visited Margaret at her treatment facility. The transformation was remarkable. Proper medication and therapy had given Margaret peace she hadn't known in decades. She was painting, finding beauty in the world again. "I owe you an apology," Margaret said as they walked in the facility's garden. "I let my confusion and pain turn into something dark. I wanted to hurt you, to make you feel the confusion I felt." "We've all been victims of secrets," Camilla replied. "But we don't have to let them define us anymore." As she left the facility, Camilla reflected on the strange journey that had begun with an attempted escape. The royal guard who had stopped her that night had discovered something startling indeed. Not just a threat to her safety, but a key that unlocked decades of hidden truth. She had entered royal life feeling like an imposter. Someone who didn't deserve her position because of her past. But confronting that past, owning its truths and lies alike, had given her something she'd never expected. Authenticity. The woman who returned to Clarence House that day was neither the frightened duchess who had tried to flee, nor the young woman who had lived in ignorant bliss at Bowleyhyde Manor. She was someone forged by truth, strengthened by adversity, and committed to living without shadows. At the next state banquet, as she stood beside Charles in her glittering tiara and gown, Camilla caught sight of James Morrison among the security detail. He gave her the slightest nod of approval, and she smiled. He had stopped her from running that night, but in doing so, he had set her free. The investigation files were sealed. The media attention moved on to other scandals, and life returned to its royal routine. But Camilla never forgot the lesson learned during those extraordinary weeks. That sometimes, the most startling discoveries aren't about the secrets others keep, but about the strength we find when we stop running from the truth. In her private diary, she wrote, "I tried to escape the prison of royal life, only to discover the real prison was the one built from family secrets and unasked questions. The guard who stopped me that night didn't just prevent an escape. He opened the door to a freedom I never knew I was seeking. The truth, however painful, has set me free." And so the Duchess of Cornwall, once reviled and ridiculed, became something she had never expected to be. A symbol of resilience, honesty, and the redemptive power of facing one's past. The woman who had tried to disappear into the night had instead stepped fully into the light, and in doing so, had finally found her place in the royal family and in the hearts of the people. The startling discovery that night had not been just about stalkers and family secrets. It had been about the transformative power of truth and the courage required to face it. Camilla had learned that running from who you are only leads you back to yourself, and that the greatest escape is not from responsibility or pressure, but from the shadows of the past that keep us from becoming who we're meant to be.